Hello, everybody. Great to see so many friends. Welcome you all. My name is Cecilia Alemani. I am the Donald R. Mullen Jr. Director and Chief Curator of Highline Art. And I'm joined here today by my colleague, Taylor Zakarin, who just recently joined the team as Associate Curator. Hi, Taylor.
Hi, nice to see everyone.
We have a very exciting presentation to share with you about the future of the Plinth. To tell you a little bit how this hour will go, I will spend a few minutes introducing the program, looking at previous images of the previous commissions, and then we'll dive into a presentation of the 12 shortlisted artists for the future Plinth. We will split the presentation in two. I will focus on the first 6, and then Taylor will follow on the last 6, purely in alphabetical order. We would encourage you to ask questions, share comments. Please do so by using the Q&A function of Zoom. I will be stopping after my 6 first artists and answer some of your questions, and then we'll do the same at the end of the presentations. But don't be shy, don't hesitate. It's great to hear your feedback and your comments and your questions, so please do so. I'm gonna start sharing my screen. Give me 1 second. So I hope you all can see well, but I'm very excited to tell you more about what's coming up on the Plinth. The Plinth, for those of you who are new to the program, is a new project that we began at the Highline in 2019. What you're looking at is the very first commission that we commissioned back in 2019 to the first artist that won the Plinth commission, Simon Lee Brick House. But to give you a little bit of context of what you are looking at, you're looking at the Highline at 30th Street and 10th Avenue. This back then in 2019, this was the newest section that just had opened in that June of 2019. And because of the kind of space that the spur looks like up there, we decided to, and it basically looks like a giant square or plaza, we decided to dedicate the center of this square to a monumental art commission that we call the Highline Plinth. Plinth as a pedestal or a base. We kind of stole or took inspiration from a very successful program that happens in London called the Fourth Plinth, which is a public art project that happens in Trafalgar Square in the center of London, that is supported by the mayor's office. And it's basically an art commission that is on view for 2 years on an empty plinth on this very famous square. So we kind of got inspiration from them and decided to do a similar project on the Highline. So in the center of the spur, you will always see a monumental commission, but it does change every 18 months. One of the main features is also that the plinth itself, the pedestal itself, changes according to every artist that are featured up there. So it's not a physical object that is there, it's more like an imaginary cube that you can visualize, but it always changes in terms of height or materials. But for us, what's really important is that art functions as a focal point of this square or this spur, not just visually, because of course, visually, as you can see, it's quite striking because this piece is visible from 10th Avenue and from many streets around the Highland, but also programmatically. You know, we love having this artwork at the center of the most wide open space on the Highlands, so that it can generate conversations, it can inspire dialogues, and it can also function as a sort of springboard for public programs and performances, exactly like a good European piazza. So we started the program back in 2019 with Simon Lee Brick House. We continued with Sam Duran Untitled Drone in 2021. And then the current Plinth that I hope you've all seen features an artwork by Pamela Rosenkrantz, who is a Swiss artist who brought this very majestic pink and red tree on the Highline, which is going to be on view until the end of September this year. So the fourth plinth, the following one, has already been chosen out of the first pool of proposals. So it's still a secret. I cannot share that with you yet. But what we're looking at today are proposals for the 5th and 6th edition of the Plinth, which will happen respectively in 2026 and 2027. So a little bit of time between now and then, but that's a great moment in which we can really listen to our community, listen to our audience, and imagine what the Plinth could be. So what you're seeing on the screen now are should be exactly 56 proposals that came our way last year. So you might ask yourself, how do we actually select these proposals? So the Plinth cycle is quite complex. So we start by asking colleagues that are curators or museum directors or other artists globally from all over the world to recommend each 3 to 5 artists from their own region that they think could take on the challenge of creating such monumental work. We put together a list of between 50 and 70 artists, which we contact, and we ask to create a digital rendering, which you're seeing right now on the screen, of what their proposal might look like. For some, this is an easy process because they're very keen on working with digital renderings. Others, you might see they're more rudimentary, meaning that they might just be a sketch, a collage, a drawing. And we love that because it kind of also gives space to the imagination, to the artistic imagination of these incredible artists that we're working with. So out of this long list of 56 proposals, we post them on our website, and we ask our community and friends to share comments, input, not necessarily to vote. It's not a vote, but it's more like we want to hear from them about first reactions to these incredible pieces. And out of this long list, you know, we wish we could realize them all, but it's quite impossible. We select a short list of 12. So today, Taylor and I will show you, and we'll talk a little bit more in depth about these 12 proposals, which were chosen by our team together with the Plinth Committee, which is a group of friends of the Highline and supporters that have been, you know, not only supporting this program, but also helping on the journey and really brainstorming with all of us on what the best proposals could be. Something to keep in mind as we do this exercise with you today is those are what you see on screen are the sort of guidelines that we keep in mind as we select our artists. We want the next Plinth to be a new commission. So especially for artists that work in series, we want to make sure that it doesn't look like something they've just done at Storm King or in another public space in New York City just last year. It needs to feel like a very new step in their career. We also want the Plinth to create a recognizable landmark. And so if you think back to the incredible views of Simone Lee from the street, from the avenue below, we really want the Plinth to be visible from all the surroundings and to function almost like, you know, like an anchor point, like a focal point in the west side of Chelsea. We also want for the piece to be site-specific, again, thinking about all the different viewpoints and vistas and perspectives that you can access the piece from, and also an artwork that can generate conversation. And sometimes this is, in a way, for perhaps the most challenging sides, because we work quite a few years ahead of time. And so we want to make sure that the piece that we chose can still be relevant. And in fact, you can see the last bullet point can still be relevant 5 years from now. So there are artworks that might be very relevant today, but might not be the same in 5 years. So we need something that, in a way, function in a sort of diluted time dimensions. And then also we support proposals that question the bounds of traditional monumental public sculpture. And what we mean by this is sometimes when we think of public art, we think of a bronze or steel sculpture that magically lands in our corporate plazas without much to do with everything around us. But we also want, and we love these sculptures. We've done plenty, but we also like to support artists that like to experiment with materials and with forms. So if there is a proposal that is maybe a series of performances on the plinth, or it's a more ephemeral artwork, we welcome these ideas because we do think that public art can be an expanded field of experimentation and not just connected to the sort of sturdiness of materials. So you'll see some of that today. So without further ado, I'm gonna tell you a little bit about these 12 proposals, which of course are now exhibited also on the Highline. So the picture you're seeing on the screen is the exhibition of the maquettes. So we call maquettes the sort of small sculptural renderings of these 12 shortlisted artists. So imagine an artist first does a digital rendering or a sketch or a drawing, and then we give them a budget to produce actually a 3D models of their piece. And this is a very, very important phase because, of course, we work with sculptors and we need to see their work three-dimensionally. We need to be able to walk around them, and we need to study the feasibility of these projects in this phase. So some of the projects have also shifted from the original ideas, have taken new dimensions or new details, but this is a very, very exciting time for the artists and for us to really be able to analyze these objects in their full scale. And they're all on scale to scale, so it's 1/16 of the original scale. So you will see as I show you the slides, they're all kind of realistic in scale. So today I'm gonna show you these first 6 proposals, starting from the first one by Dana Avartani. I'm sorry, let me just get a sip of water. Dana Avartani is an artist from Saudi. She lives between Saudi and the States, and she often works with monumental sculptural installations. She's very interested in the intersection between the traditional and the contemporary through the art of craft, which can also become a sort of political weapon or like a form of resistance. The piece that she's proposing is titled An Ode to Our Ancestors, and it's a 12-pointed star made of blocks of stones that are sort of held together through a metal armature that you wouldn't see. You would just see exactly what you're seeing on the screen. The work is an homage to the idea of craft, but also it connects specifically to what the artist refers to as sacred geometry. So sacred geometry is something that you find often in nature. So she's been very interested in exploring these sort of geometric forms that you see on a beehive, in a flower, or in a snowflakes, and these very perfect forms that are all surrounding us, while we often think of nature as something that is messy and not really organized, instead reveals itself like this perfect art form that goes from the very small detail in our body or the geometry of our DNA all the way to nature, but also to the universe and to the cosmic sort of level. So this has been something that has inspired her quite a bit in previous works of hers. So she wants to also echo the relationship between the Highline, her piece, and the nature surrounding, the flowers surrounding her, the bees that are very active on the Highline itself, but also thinking about the stone masonry that you see often in houses and buildings around the Highline. So there are different layers of interpretation. This is the maquette that was photographed in our office, and then of course is currently on the Highline. And this is an image to give you a sense of what her work looks like prior to the Highline. This is a work she did in the desert in Saudi that has a similar sort of structure. So thinking about an artist that is interested in using abstraction, which as you will see is very sort of rare in these 12 shortlisted that we chose, but does that in a very powerful and meaningful way. Next artist is Leila Babi, is an artist from Uganda. She lives here now in New York City. She actually escaped from Uganda. She's a refugee here in the States because she was persecuted for her sexual orientation. And so she has been making works in New York, and she's proposing this beautiful double sculpture of two heads. They're kind of genderless faces that are kind of connected through their hair or bound together through their braids in the hair. And she talks about the sort of the piece as a sign of friendship and support, sort of two faces looking or having each other's back. The piece would be made of, here's a maquette, would be fully made of bronze, including the plinth itself. But to give you an idea, this was the sort of original drawing that she submitted, which but then morphed into more rudimentary maquette that you see on the left to then be fully realized as a maquette here. And Leila is someone that has worked in public art quite a bit. Here you see some pictures of previous works. To the left, you have actually a regular, let's say, indoor piece, but it's important to see and look at it because of the texture. She's very quite masterful in managing different texture. The head itself is made of ceramic, while the hair is made of rubber that is being braided and kind of through which has been inserted different kind of little objects. And so this sort of contrast between the softness of the hair and the hardness of the surface is often translated also in her public work. Here to the right, you see an example of a piece that she realized a few years ago at Brooklyn Bridge Park for Public Art Fund. And she's also actually, together with Dana Avartani, the artist I just showed you, she's also just been featured in the Venice Biennale, which of course is a very important exhibition, which just took place last week, opened last week in Venice. And in Venice, sorry, I don't have a picture of her pieces, but she had 4 or 5 beautiful sculptures that are outside. Next artist is Natalie Ball. Natalie Ball is an indigenous artist from the Klamath tribe of the Pacific Northwest. She makes gorgeous sculptures made often of found materials. I'll show you a couple of pictures in a second. But what she's proposing for the plinth is a sort of evolution of the sort of first proposal that she shared with us. So if you have looked at the proposals, you might not recognize this. This is a detail of that first proposal, but it's a fish that is in general considered by many people a sort of trash fish, but for her tribe is actually an endangered fish and is considered a sacred fish. And this is why she has covered the surface of the fish with these tribal drawings that come from her own tribe. So in a way, it's a commentary on climate change and of course on the importance of nature in our life. Here you see some great pictures of the maquette. And so here, for instance, you can start seeing that artists are experimenting also with color and with different kinds of plinth material. So in this case, she would paint the plinth of this quite beautiful, evocative blue, and the sort of face of the fish would be kind of my height. So you could actually sort of interact with it. And here you see, just to give you some examples of what her work looks like normally. Some of you in New York might have seen, she just had recently a really great show at the Whitney Museum in the sort of ground floor gallery, where she presented some similar works to the ones that you're seeing on screen. Next artist is Sami Babel. Sami Babel is an artist from Congo. He lives between Congo and Brussels, and mostly he works with photography and film, but also has been exploring sculpture in a number of recent works. He is very interested in thinking about migrations of people, but also of materials. So often his works, both in films and in sculptures, follow the sort of evolution, for instance, of a specific material like copper throughout time and throughout different geography, to, of course, reflect on the many different histories of our people. In this case, he's proposing this giant horn, which would be made of this kind of yellowish material. It's the work itself is a reference to various musical histories of the American South. In particular, here you can see the maquette. The maquette looks like copper. Well, it is copper, but the piece would be made of brass, so it would be on it would look like it's yellow, not kind of reddish. And here you see a picture of the piece, but the reference of this object is manifold. In particular, he's interested in thinking about a law in Louisiana that required for freed Black individuals and Native American people to join the military, but at the same time, they were afraid of insurrection, so they didn't allow them to carry weapons, and so they often became musicians, and they were part of the sort of musical band of the military. So they brought different instruments, and so I'm not going to go into too many details of these references, but he's interested in thinking about music and musical instruments also as an act of insurrections and a tool for resistance. And so the piece itself would also be covered with these patterns of scarification, which have been used by the artists in other pieces, most notably this smaller version of the piece outside. And the plinth itself would be shaped more like a crystal, evoking another history, the one of the trade of sugar, that of course is also quite relevant in the colonial history. Next artist is Abraham Putzvillegas. He's an artist from Mexico. He's a mid-career, fairly well-known artist who is proposing a artwork called Untitled Pupa. And what you see is a rendition of a milkweed, which of course, for all of you Highline lovers, you know, it's a plant that grows quite extensively on the Highline. And what's attached to the milkweed is a cocoon of a monarch butterfly. So he's like a chrysalis of a butterfly. So it's a very beautiful, very poetic piece. It's fairly simple in its form. It's quite realistic. To the left, you see actually what a cocoon looks like, and to the right is one of his original sketches. The plinth itself would be painted pink, but the story is also a bit more complex. He wants to talk about migration, and migration not just of natural forces like butterflies that migrate actually from the region in Mexico where he was born and where his family still lives, all the way through New York City, all the way to Canada. And he often talks about something that is quite evocative. He often says that for animals, there is no border. They can just cross all these borders without problem. But also thinking about migration of people, in particular, those that live from Mexico to come to America to find a better future. So here you see a comparison between the two migrations. And this is a piece that he realized about a few years ago at Tate Modern, where he actually worked with actual plants. So in a way, that's something that has been in his practice for quite a while. Of course, ours will be purely a sort of fictional sculpture. Nothing will grow in there, hopefully. The last piece I want to talk to you about is Rachel Feinstein, who is an amazing artist based here in New York City. You might remember she had plenty of ideas in the long list. I think she had 4 or 5 different projects and proposals. And in this case, we chose one of them. It's called Castle on the Rock. And what it is, it's a giant sculpture made of jasper, right, Taylor? Yes.
Green malachite.
Oh, sorry, green malachite. We went to different iteration, but the most important thing is that what you're looking at would be an actual stone. And what you see on the top of the piece is a little castle. And so she was very much inspired by, and this is the view from 10th Avenue, she was very much inspired by Renaissance paintings, in which you often see, a castle at the very end of the scene. But also she was doing at the time an exhibition at the Jewish Museum, where she was working with a collection and found these incredible objects that are called, they are the marriage ring. They're kind of the engagement rings that have a little house or castle at the top in sign of prosperity and hope for the future. So she kind of mixed these two items. So if you actually look at it, it is a giant ring. So you could actually stick your finger in the bottom part. Of course, this would be a giant one, but she did actually make a ring. So here you actually see the quarry in Brazil, where she would carve out the piece to the right. You see, it would be exactly one piece. And then here you can see in the middle that she has made a prototype of a ring of, I think in this case, I don't know if it was jade or jasper, but with a little castle on top. And here we had a very nice studio visit a while ago with her in her studio with many different prototypes of stones, and how, the metal part would kind of dialogue with the rest. But I'm going to take a break because I spoke a lot. And so these are the first 6. So let me see in the Q&A if there are some questions, but please feel free to add more. We always want to hear from you. So I see one question from Grace. Are there projects which specifically reference the Highline itself and Manhattan in general? Well, I think in a way, they're never necessarily very specific, but if you think about the Abraham Puts Villegas, the sort of butterfly piece, for all of you lovers of the horticulture on the Highline, the milkweed is one of the most striking, I think, one of the most striking plant and scary plants that grow on the Highline. So I do think there is a reference, but also it talks about, of course, larger histories and larger implication. Also, in a way, I think the work by Dana Vartani, the first one that I showed you, the more abstract one, does talk about New York City and the way of constructing buildings. So I think it's, for artists, is always a good solution to find something like a sweet spot between being openly referencing something about the Highline, but also being able to engage with larger themes and larger topics. Another comment, I wish that the pupa could evolve over time. That's on the Highline. That would be a great, that would be really great. We can see if the artists can have ideas, but sometimes what we can do is maybe the sculpture itself doesn't change, because that's also quite challenging. But what we can do is we can create public programs that talk about, the evolution of light, life, metamorphosis. And so there is a whole opportunity for us to use the sculpture, which often is static, as a platform for discussions and conversations and public programs. Another question, I see in Rachel's Castle on the Rock an analogy with our city on the schist. Did she talk about that? I don't remember her talking about that, but Taylor, correct me if I'm wrong. Is this process of bringing the public new, or did it happen before? No, we've always done it. We've always asked for public input. Maybe we were a bit less used to using, QR codes pre-COVID, but we've done it so this is the 3rd cycle that we've done. So we've always done it. And actually, if you ask yourself how you leave comments, you can do it on our website or also on our social media. When you're out on the Highline in front of the maquettes, there is a QR code that you can scan and leave feedback. For us, it's harder to leave physical feedback because, as you all know, it's very windy up there, but we do take into consideration all your comments and feedback. So who determines which piece? So it's not necessarily a vote. So the process implies that we take into account the comments and feedback of all our friends and supporters and community. And then there is this committee that is called the Plinth Committee, which eventually makes the decision together with myself and Taylor and Alan and sort of the Highline. So it's so far it's been a very smooth process and very fluid. So it's worked very well. Do you think this public commission could be possible in Italy? That's an interesting question. I wish. That would be amazing. You know, I think in a way, the Plinth itself came about also because I'm Italian and I grew up with being surrounded by squares and piazza all the time. And I always feel like it's something that is missing in New York City. We don't really have lots of these gathering points because real estate is very precious, I guess. But it's... you know, the problem with Italy is that we're full of monuments already in each square and plaza. So it might be hard to negotiate, but I think it would be amazing. But there is not a lot of contemporary art out there, but we'll see. There is one more question. Are there any environmental concerns mining such a large zone of the castle? I think is a very good point. I think that's something that we would certainly keep in mind, and we would certainly use environmental friendly techniques and, you know, providers, but that's certainly something that we would keep in mind. Could you share, I take the last one because I'm aware of time, so I want to make sure that Taylor has enough time to talk. So could you share an example of a conversation that was prompted by a previous piece? Yes, most recently, our colleague Constanza Valenzuela, who is our assistant curator, curated a beautiful day of poetry that were inspired by Old Tree, by the pink tree that is currently in the Highline. She invited a bunch of contemporary poets that are based in New York and have been inspired either by the tree or by nature or by the tree of life to compose poetry that were read aloud. It was a very moving, very beautiful, beautiful event. So I'm gonna keep the last two questions maybe for the final questions, and I'm gonna pass it on to Taylor, who is gonna talk about the next 6 ones, starting from Camille Andro.
Yes, so this work you were found by Camille Andro. She's a French artist who's based here in New York, actually lives and works in Chelsea. And as you can tell, it's this sort of larger than life bronze sculpture of a barn owl. And so to Camille, the barn owl is a symbol of being a keen listener and observer. You know, that the barn owl is often associated with magic and with witchcraft, with intelligence and wisdom, and mythologically has been seen occasionally as an omen of death or the rebirth cycle. As you can see here in that image on the left, one of its legs in her proposal is wounded and is instead replaced with a wooden peg. And you can see in this image, the owl's tail sort of unravels into this swooping sheet. It ends in this tightly round scroll, and it's standing on top of this pile of letters that, you know, perhaps as Cecilia mentioned, it's very windy there. Perhaps the barn owl is standing on to make sure that those papers don't fly away in the wind. It's worth noting that barn owls, like most owls, are nighttime creatures. They can see and hear in the darkness. And Camille has talked about, and you can see a little bit in this photo, about using a type of treatment or patina on the bronze plinth that would effectively make the face light up a bit at night, hopefully and presumably not in a way that would be disruptive to traffic, but enough that it would be as this sort of like glowing in the dark figure overlooking the city. And Camille also, when we were speaking to her about the work, has talked about how the barn owl itself has adapted as an animal to human intrusion into its natural habitats. So, you know, they can make their home in the wild, but they also have learned to sort of catch prey and make their home in human environments, such as a barn, as its name suggests. And so, you know, placing it in the middle of Manhattan on the Highline is sort of a perfect representation of that. adaptation from the barn owl to, you know, exist in any environment. And something I think that's, you know, really just lovely about that work is this feeling that, you know, we're so used to looking at works of art, but it almost feels like here it's looking at us and we become the prey. We're much smaller than the work. It would be 26 feet tall and cast bronze. And so it really causes this moment of sort of pause and contemplation. And those are some previous works of hers. So next is Mira Lee's The Leaking Machine. So Mira Lee is a Korean artist who lives in Amsterdam. She works often with mechanical and kinetic artworks. She's, you know, often visualizing the digestive systems and organic, you know, systems, and using different fluids and goo and glitter and, you know, a lot of different materials like this. And her proposal, The Leaking Machine, is this sort of chandelier, like dream catcher like fountain that would have these 8 arms that support then water hoses. You can see them here, that would then continuously actually leak water, that it's sitting in this sort of tank of water that you can see in these renderings. And here's her maquette where, you know, the hoses would suck up the water from the bottom of this tank and then spread it across these arms. And it has these rain chains that hang down from the piece. And those metal chains are designed to basically guide and enhance this trickling, leaking like flow of water, as opposed to most fountains that have this very even, you know, heavy flow of water. And for the chains, the artist had this idea that, you know, these clusters of palm-sized objects, these pieces of metal, would actually be gathered from an open call to the local community. So these would all be, you know, easily found, accessible items like household trash or cans or little pieces of metal or glass you might have at your home. And what she would want to do is basically invite people to infuse these objects from their own homes with energy, with, you know, positive thoughts of health and vitality, and then hand them in, and she would weave them into these longer chains that would then hang from the piece. And, you know, Mira's really just trying to celebrate this organic and accumulative, obsessive nature of art, as well as creating this positive energy source. And you can see here The Healing Machine by Emery Blagden, which is the work that her proposal is really inspired by. And he was an outsider artist who made works in the 60s and 70s for these giant assemblage pieces, found materials similar to what Mira is proposing. And that work is meant to sort of channel the powers of the earth. And here you can see some of her past work, and, you know, that the goo and the water and all of these different materials that she uses. And that work would be about 23 feet tall. So next we have Candice Lynn. Candice is an artist who's based in LA. Her parents immigrated to Los Angeles from China, and her practice generally really engages with both, you know, digital art forms with new forms of digital technology, and also Chinese migration, and specifically the Chinese migration to the US and these traditions that have sort of held strong, specifically thinking about those traditions that her family has held on to, like Qigong, which her parents practiced and taught her as a child. And Qigong is an ancient Chinese sort of exercise or type of meditation and breath work. And her proposal here, the Cat Demon Protector, is this giant sculpture of a cat. And this is, you can see it really best here. That character is recurring throughout her body of work, which I'll show you in a few slides. The Cat Demon Protector is this sort of trickster type cat. She talks about him as he's sort of street smart and foul-mouthed, and, you know, is this sort of hilarious, humorous figure, but also is here at the spur to lead people through Qigong exercise. Also, you can sort of see in this image, it has sort of this many-breasted spotted body that is a reference to early feminist mythic figures that were, you know, a form of protection to ward off negativity. Think of like sort of a gargoyle type figures on buildings. And so that's where the cat demon's body is coming from. And the head, you can see here, it says rotating head, AR element. So the head of the Cat Demon Protector would actually rotate once an hour at the top of the hour, sort of like as she says, like an exorcist cuckoo clock. And there would also be an AR component where you could scan a code And on your phone, it would then pop up this video of basically an animated version of the cat demon protector teaching and leading you through the Qigong poses and through Qigong breath work. And you can also see here in the maquette that for those who maybe don't want to scan it or don't have a smartphone or don't want to use the AR component, she's also etched those movements and the directions on how to do those different Qigong exercises into the aluminum base of the plinth itself. And in this regard, I think, yeah, there you can see the head spinning, which is very funny. So it would do that every hour at the top of the hour. And the idea, I think, of having people do Qigong along with the cat demon protector, whether through scanning the code and doing it through the AR app or doing it by seeing the plinth, is that the plaza and the spur in general become sort of a part of the sculpture, and the people who are doing it, as you can see in this image, become a part of the work of art. It's this sort of living, embodied, and alive sculpture. And I think that she really loved the idea of turning that entire space into a part of the work of art as well. And it would be made of cast aluminum and would be probably around 13 feet tall. And here you can see how this figure has appeared throughout some of her previous work. So next we have The Light Shines Through the Universe. This is a proposal by Twan Nguyen, who is a great Vietnamese artist who lives in Vietnam. And you might recognize right off the bat that this is sort of a replica, but also a reimagining of one of the Bamiyan Buddhas. And so for those who may not know, in Bamiyan in Afghanistan in 2001, or rather, there were these two monumental Buddha figures, which you can see here, that were carved into the side of a mountain. They were, around 180 feet and 125 feet. And in 2001, they were bombed and destroyed by the Taliban. And they were a UNESCO World Heritage Site prior to that. And while you can see in these images of it, especially on the left, where it still was in its niche, they had survived numerous other attempts at destruction over their sort of 1,500-year lifespan in that location. And that's why, you can see they're pockmarked, or the face is missing in some places, or limbs are missing, or part of the leg is missing, there's no hands. But they had still sort of remained and stayed strong in that location and were really symbolic to the people that lived in the area. They affectionately called the larger of the two Sol Sol, which means the light shines through the universe, the title of Twan's proposal. And so, with that in mind, he was thinking, while recreating this, about the destruction of heritage as a weapon, and truly, taking into consideration the importance of defending cultural diversity and cultural history. So here you can see the maquette, and Twan's proposal has these two hands that are sitting out front of the Buddha, and they rest in a mudra, which is a sort of ceremonial or ritual hand gesture. And in this specific mudra, these two positionings mean fearlessness and compassion. And they would be cast in brass, and that brass would actually be sort of melted down artillery shells that were sourced from both Vietnam, where the artist lives and works, and from Afghanistan. And these become stand-ins for missing hands, for missing appendages, and thinking about, also just, here's a great example of these stand-ins for missing appendages that in all likelihood were destroyed during times of violence and warfare. And Twan is really thinking, I think, about this idea of not just reincarnation, but sort of a resiliency and renewal and repair, that it's not sort of, he makes a point of saying it's not just recreating something that has been lost, but being really thoughtful about the renewal and the repair aspect. And so using these melted down artillery shells, using melted down bombs, and casting them into this sort of sign of peace and this extension of the human body is really significant to him. I will just note in the maquette, you'll see that it was maybe a gray sandstone. The actual plinth work, if he were to be one of the selections, would be in yellow sandstone, which you can see in his rendering. So exactly, yes, that color is more akin to what he would be using materially. So next is Ema Ugbo. Emeka is an artist who is from Nigeria, lives and works between Nigeria and Berlin, and his proposal is for a work called Ijele 2.0. And the Ijele is this sort of giant mask and cultural emblem that's used in different traditional ceremonies, momentous occasions, harvest festivals that are really focused, any ceremonies that are focused around community and renewal in Emeka's Igbo community in eastern Nigeria. And here's a great image of the Ijele. The mask itself is on its own, not just the sculpture, is typically around 15 feet tall. And it's adorned with these human and animal spirit motifs. They're really decorative, and they all hold different symbolic meaning. And Emeka has talked about, the Igbo worldview is very focused on, intertwining our human world and our daily activities with the spirit world and the world of animals and nature. And the Ijele really brings all of these things together into one ceremonial mask. And so his proposal, Ijele 2.0, retains those formal attributes and ideas and the conceptual ideas behind the Ijele and the masquerade, while incorporating these modern day representations of contemporary events and contemporary themes and people. So if you'll see, he's sort of changed these banners that you'll see in front of the work into these contemporary symbols. So it's things like cryptocurrency or artificial intelligence, global warming, the symbol for COVID-19. He's proposed putting these puppets at the top of the masquerade of Barack Obama or, Greta Thunberg or Elon Musk. And, the maquette we have on view right now, we've just left blank for those figures because, as Cecilia mentioned earlier, we're talking about a work that's going on view at the soonest in 2026. And so, who might be the relevant figures to go on the top of the Ijele is sort of up to time, and we'll see closer to if he were to be one of the two. So we've left those blank for now, but he's just sort of sent some suggestions in. And that work, similar to the Ijele itself, would be around 15 feet tall. And here's some other work. And so our last maquette that we're going to talk about, now I'm just going to have a sip of water quickly, is Gala Kim, Future Spaces Replicate Earlier Spaces. So Gala is a great artist who is from Colombia, but lives and works in LA. And this work is it's a continuation of ongoing work that she's doing throughout her practice, where she's really focusing on investigating ancient objects that have specific functions, and those functions are often not activated in a museum context. And so she's thinking about, how can you take these items that are sitting in museums now that were perhaps ritual or significant in different communities, and how do we revive those forms and adapt those forms, or perhaps look at them in a new way? So here she proposes this large sculpture of a strombid conch shell, which is an extinct mollusk. And that shell of the strombid conch was used throughout antiquity by various civilizations as instruments in rituals, but also as decoration in the house, in addition to obviously being a shelter for the mollusk itself. And on the Highline, and this is a great image to show, the exterior of the sculpture would have a decorative carving that's similar to the ancient ritual objects that Gala has seen in museums. For example, a Mayan conch that is an instrument that has carvings that she saw recently at the Met. And I believe this image on the left is an example of that work. And so Gala's work would be on the Highline, made from fiberglass and painted with pigment and crushed shells to create this sort of pearlescent finish. And the plinth itself would be fabricated with, you can see it here, these sort of like shell-stone slabs. And these are actually used in different constructions and buildings still to this day in mass-produced way, but they all do contain actual like ancient shell pieces that are embedded in that material. And Gala also would propose having a speaker embedded inside the shell itself on the Highline, and it would play, we aren't sure exactly, at what frequency, but it would play the sound that was recently rediscovered when you use the conch, the 18,000-year-old conch, as an instrument. So scientists only recently sort of tested that out and discovered that sound. That was very much so a big part of these rituals and ceremonies in the past. And I think also Gala mentioned, she was interested in placing this sort of very organic form of shelter for that mollusk in the middle of New York City, surrounded by skyscrapers as a sort of contrast. And again, also with sort of a view towards the Hudson River as a sort of beacon back to, or reconnecting the shell back to the water. And so here you can see everything we've talked about.
Thank you, Taylor. I know you're gonna ask a lot of more questions, so don't hesitate. In the meantime, we're gonna catch some of the earlier ones. I'm gonna start with the first one, Taylor, then I'll pass to the last ones. But what is the Highline saying with our selections? What is the overall theme? This is a very interesting question. There isn't necessarily, and we don't pick a theme, but what's very interesting, especially in the process of the long list, when we have this massive group of artworks and artists, there are themes that arise that we didn't dictate. And so it's been interesting to see every cycle that we've done this. Now, this is the third one, how different these themes are. So this time, for instance, there is a lot of history of looking back, but also a lot of animals, which we never had before, nature and monumentality. And in a way, what it does, I think it tells you what are the preoccupations and the anxieties and the themes that artists from all over the world are thinking of right now. So it's a very I think it's a very good picture of what's happening in the art world right now, globally. I'll let you handle the next one, maybe.
So I see a question. Yeah, I thought that the plinth was the pedestal or base that holds a statue. For our purposes, is the plinth the entire physical item? So that's a great question. So yes, technically a plinth is the base, the pedestal for a work. But for this purpose, we sort of use plinth with a capital P to describe the entire project. And also, though, it's worth noting that, unlike the fourth plinth in London, which Cecilia talked about before, where it is this static sort of pedestal, and then the artists propose and put a work on top of that pedestal, here at the Spur, we allow the artists to also design and create their own pedestal, their own actual plinth for their sculptural commission. So that's why you'll see with all of these, with the exception of Rachel Feinstein's, which is not on a plinth, actually, it would be just on the spur and bolted into the ground. All of these others, you'll see that their base is different. And that's because we sort of encourage them to come up with a creative design that holds their piece and becomes a part of the work itself. So yes, plinth is the base, but also capital P, plinth is the project.
There's a question about color, how much color, how much color is important in the selection. That's also a very nice question. We've done a black piece, a white piece. Now we have a very pink piece on the Highline. So I think it offers a completely different experience. I think it's less about what specific color, but it's more about creating something that stands out in the very, very busy cityscape that is up there. So I think even with the first two pieces, there were one black and one white, they both worked very well, even though they didn't necessarily use very striking colors, because in a way, as you look at the plinth up from 10th Avenue, there is this incredible background of the sky that basically magnifies everything that is up there. So I think it's about thinking also about a sort of progression of the plinth that we've done so far. So, but that doesn't mean that we're not going to do another black piece, let's say. So it's really what the work stands for. For how long the project will be showcased, that's 18 months every piece, so 1.5 years. Normally on the Highline, everything that you see is about 1 year long. This is a bit more complicated in terms of production. So it takes a bit, it stays on view also for a bit longer, which is still it's quite a short time. So
I live on 10th Ave nearby and all that. Oh, that was just a positive comment. Lovely. That's great. How are these pieces financed, materials, work, and installation? So that's a great question. I could let Cecilia take the first part of that. I feel like you're the expert on the sort of overarching, financing and lead up to.
So as we do with the rest of the art program, it's very important that we support the artists in every single phase of this process. So we fully pay for production, we offer competitive artist fees, we pay for shipping, for installation, which I can tell you is very, very expensive up there because we need a crane very often, maintenance, and public programs. So we try to support the artists in every possible way, but not only financially. I think something that we're very proud of is that we really offer support in sharing our know-how and expertise in fabricating public artwork. So many of these artists have never done a public artwork before. So what we like to do is not just supporting them financially, but also really sharing our expertise, and in terms of fabricators, in terms of structural engineering, things that artists don't necessarily love to take care of, and that's when we come in. So our support extends beyond just financially.
So, this is a great question. Has any consideration been given to place the pieces that haven't been chosen into the path along the Highline? So, excellent question, because yes, that has happened actually already before. There have been works that were proposals for the Plinth that made it to the shortlist, and we had maquettes of, and then Cecilia worked with those artists and our team worked with those artists to scale down that work to a size and a budget that made more sense for the path, because those are only on view for a year, and they're obviously just compared to the Plinth, they're still a large undertaking, but compared to the Plinth, they're a smaller undertaking and a smaller scale. And so there have been works already in the past that we've had as our Highline commissions that have been along the path that were initially a version of them, a proposal for the Plinth, such as Nina Byer's Fountain, but also Kapwani Kawanga's work, which is currently on view on the Highline on Little West 12th and the Highline by the Standard. That work was originally a proposal for the Plinth, a larger version of it.
And this just to continue what Taylor was saying, we wish we could realize them all. They're all, I love all of these 12. I would choose all of them, but we can't, unfortunately. So what we will choose is what really makes sense for that space. It's not necessarily it's a beautiful piece or not, but it's a piece that makes a lot of sense there. So sometimes there are artworks that are great, but we feel we could realize elsewhere on the Highland. They don't necessarily need that kind of viewpoints from the avenue or that kind of gathering space around, or they might look even better surrounded by the vegetation, which is not something that happens up at the spur. So the question about Kapwani Kiwanga, for instance, is a great piece. I actually think it looks even better where it is sited now, surrounded by nature. So we do stay in touch with all of these artists and try to consider them as our extended Highland family. Maybe we do one more question because we're already at 6 o'clock. I would like to know more about the art program on the Highline. There is art all over the Highline as you walk the park from Gansevoort all the way to 34. There is art everywhere. We don't have necessarily spots dedicated to art. We like to invade the planting beds, the path, and kind of surprise the audience with great art everywhere. We don't necessarily only just do sculptures and large scale installations. We also screen films and videos in our series called Highland Channel. We do great performances, and I also want to shout out next week on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. Taylor is curating an amazing performance on the Highline by an artist called Matty Davis, which will be a sort of processional experience from Gansevoort all the way to 30th Street. Come if you can. It's sold out, but we'll make space for you all. And so we try to kind of think of public art, not just as a static bronze sculpture, but as an art experience that can include ephemeral and more time-based experience on the Highline. I think we can conclude here. I want to thank you all for joining us today. If you're curious to learn more about these sculptures and maquettes, come to the Highline. The maquettes are on view on the Highline at 30th Street under the Coach Passage. They will be there until the summer. You can leave your feedback there. You can also just do it from your home through our website or follow us on social media. And if you want to learn more about the Highline in general, we have a great website full of information and newsletter, but most importantly, come to our events and join us on the Highline. Thank you very much.
Thank you.